Hello and welcome to Historia Romana. Episode 11. Death of the Founder. We know surprisingly little about the majority of Romulus's reign, with very few recorded events after the first decade or so. For the last 20 years of his life, just about the only thing we know for certain is that Romulus spent a lot of his time on military campaigns against his neighbors. It's not clear why Romulus felt a change of heart towards embroiling Rome in conflict, whereas before he'd only reluctantly prepared for war during the Camerini affair, and later acted hastily to avoid war during the Tatius scandal. Perhaps now that he had positioned himself as the only center of power in internal politics, Romulus felt that he could afford to throw his weight around without serious domestic consequences. Sometime after Tatius's death, Rome experienced its first famine. Romulus called for aid from the Roman colony in Crustumerium, which dutifully prepared provisions and sailed them by boat down the Tiber. However, these provisions were seized by forces from an Etruscan outpost along the southern bank of the river named Fidenae, who killed some of the Roman defenders and refused to provide restitution. Incensed by their actions, Romulus launched an invasion into their territory. After a fierce struggle, resulting in heavy casualties on both sides, the Fidenate army was defeated and driven into retreat. Once again pursuing them closely, Romulus and his troops breached the city's walls alongside the fleeing enemy. Fidenae was captured in the initial assault, and Romulus punished a few of the leading citizens while leaving a garrison of 300 men behind, thus establishing Fidenae as a Roman colony. Bear in mind that the early Roman army wasn't well suited for long-time deployments, so leaving a permanent garrison signified how strategically important this site was to Romulus. The food shortage was not solved, however, and soon the city was hit with a wave of pestilence. Cameria, taking advantage of the weakened state of their overlord, attacked the Roman colonists residing among them, killing some and expelling the rest. In retaliation, Romulus led his army against the upstart settlement for a third time, and having now been betrayed twice, he no longer felt the need to grant the Camerini any mercy. He executed the leaders of the revolt, allowed his soldiers to plunder the town, and seized the remaining land for more Roman settlers, leaving behind another garrison. With the war spoils acquired from Cameria, Romulus built a large statue of himself, with an inscription that reinforced his claim to be a demigod and the rightful ruler of Rome. This seems to hint at some kind of internal dissent that Romulus was trying to quell, likely from the Sabine faction. In the meantime, the capture of Fidenae had not gone unnoticed by the nearby Etruscan city of Veii. Unlike Romulus's previous enemies, Veii was a proper urbanized city, with a population at least as big as Rome's. Controlling most of the northern bank of the Tiber, Veii was said to be one of the richest cities in Etruria, due to all the trade that passed through their lands. The loss of Fidenae, which was likely one of their colonies, signaled that the Veientes now faced an imminent threat to their economic and military power. When their demands that Rome abandon the colony were ignored, they amassed a large army and crossed the Tiber, establishing a camp near Fidenae. However, Romulus had received intelligence about their march and had already positioned himself with a force at Fidenae, ready to confront them. During the night, the Roman forces occupied a nearby height and concealed their best men for an ambush. When the two armies clashed in the plain the following day, the Roman ambushers easily routed the Veientes, who fled from the battlefield. In their attempt to escape, many of the Veientes tried to swim back across the Tiber, where a significant number drowned. Had the Veientes recognized this loss and refrained from further action, they would have avoided further misfortune. However, they believed that a larger force would ensure victory, so they gathered another army, including reinforcements from allied cities, and launched a second campaign against the Romans. In the ensuing battle, the Romans emerged triumphant once again, inflicting heavy casualties on the Veientes and taking many prisoners. Following their defeat, the Veiente king sent ambassadors to Romulus seeking an end to the war and asking for forgiveness. In the following treaty, Veii was required to cede the land on the west bank of the Tiber near Rome, abandon the salt works near the river's mouth, and provide 50 hostages as a guarantee of future loyalty. Once the terms were agreed, Romulus established a non-aggression treaty with them for 100 years. This war marked Romulus's third known victory celebration, which was grander than the previous two. He shortly after released all the Veientine prisoners without ransom, allowing them to return home if they wished. Many of the prisoners chose instead to stay in Rome and were granted Roman citizenship. These are the campaigns we are told of, though it is implied Romulus participated in more. The final event we know from the age of Romulus is his death, which is relayed in two ways. On July 5, 716 BC, Romulus ordered the men of Rome to assemble on the Campus Martius to review the army for the next year's campaigning season. Suddenly, a violent storm arose out of nowhere, shrouding the king in a dense mist that obscured him from the view of the crowd. From that moment on, Romulus was never seen on Earth again. The senators who stood closest to him claimed that he had been carried away by the storm, and the assembled crowd were struck with grief. Soon after, however, a senator named Proculus Julius arrived late to the assembly and addressed the Romans with startling news. He claimed that while traveling from the Quirinal Hill to the Campus Martius, Romulus had briefly descended from the sky before him, informing Proculus that he had ascended into heaven to join his father Mars, and that under his divine watch, Rome was destined to become a great power. The Roman people, previously stricken with mourning for their king, and not a little bit of suspicion as to what had really happened to him, were assuaged by the assurance of his immortality. A temple was soon after established to worship the new deity on the Quirinal Hill, under the name Quirinus. As time went on, the entire population came to hail Romulus, already the son of a god, as a god himself. They prayed for his favor, imploring him to always protect his descendants. This telling is clearly mythical, and even most of the ancient authors did not accept it, at least not at face value. Some, like Livy and Dionysius, insist that instead of ascending to heaven, Romulus was secretly murdered by his own senators. They certainly would have had a motive to do so. He had long shown favoritism toward the original citizens of Rome, while neglecting those who were later enrolled, particularly the Sabines. More recently, while he had generally shown mercy to Rome's enemies, such as with releasing the Veientine prisoners, he demonstrated excessive cruelty in punishing Romans who broke the law, such as ordering a group of Roman bandits to be thrown off the Tarpeian Rock on the Saturnine Hill. Even more egregiously, in both of these cases, he had personally passed judgment without senatorial oversight, which further contributed to growing discontent amongst the aristocracy. According to this version, the patricians who conspired against him carried out the assassination in the Senate House. They dismembered his body into several pieces to conceal it, and each senator hid their part under their robes before secretly burying it in the nearby marshes. This version takes an even darker turn when one considers that Romulus was, confirmably, associated with the god Quirinus in later times, meaning that the senators likely fabricated the deification story to assuage the masses from taking revenge upon them. Whether he ascended to heaven to live with the gods or was murdered and dissected, Romulus was about 55 years old when he left the mortal world and had reigned over Rome as its first king for 37 of those years. Both of his children, assuming they even existed, had already died before him, leaving no obvious heirs to take up the throne of Rome. His passing marked the end of Rome's founding era and thus brings the story of Act 1 to a close. Or does it? Next time, using modern archaeological sources, we'll double back and begin to reanalyze what we've learned so far and how much, if any of it, was actually true. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Until next time.